It was a crisp autumn morning in Portland when I received the letter that would change my life forever. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the streets in shades of gold and crimson. I remember the crunch of fallen leaves under my feet as I walked to the mailbox, my breath visible in the cool air. Little did I know that nestled among the usual bills and junk mail was an envelope that held the key to my future. As I sorted through the mail at my kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, my eyes fell on a letter from my parents' lawyer. My heart skipped a beat. It had been 6 months since their passing, and the wound was still fresh. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, my mind racing with possibilities. The words on the page blurred as I tried to comprehend what I was reading. An inheritance. $800,000. The mug slipped from my grasp, spilling coffee across the worn wooden table, but I barely noticed. My parents, always frugal and hardworking, had left me a fortune I never knew existed. In that moment, the weight of years of struggle seemed to lift from my shoulders. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up late, poring over my small business's books, wondering how I'd make ends meet. The times I'd had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. The dreams I'd put on hold, thinking they were out of reach. Now, sitting in my tiny apartment kitchen, surrounded by mismatched furniture and peeling wallpaper, I felt a surge of hope so strong it brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't just money. It was opportunity, security, and a chance to honor my parents' memory by building the life they'd always wanted for me. As the reality of my newfound wealth sank in, my mind began to race with possibilities. The first thing that came to mind was a home of my own. I'd been renting for years, moving from one cramped apartment to another, never feeling truly settled. Now, I could have a place to call my own, a sanctuary where I could put down roots and build memories. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of research and planning. I scoured real estate listings, imagining myself in each home. A craftsman bungalow with a wraparound porch where I could sip lemonade on summer evenings. A modern loft downtown, close to the bustling farmers' markets and art galleries. A cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, with a garden where I could grow my own vegetables. But it wasn't just about finding a house, it was about creating a home. I sketched out floor plans, envisioning where I'd put a reading nook, how I'd set up a home office, the perfect spot for a dining table where I could host friends for dinner parties. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream big, to imagine a life not constrained by financial worries. As I planned my future home, I couldn't help but think of my parents. They had always emphasized the importance of having a place to call your own, a lesson born from their own struggles as immigrants who had worked tirelessly to provide for our family. I hoped that wherever they were, they would be proud of how I was using their gift. But a home was just the beginning. My mind turned to my business, a small artisanal soap company I'd started 3 years ago. It had been a labor of love, born out of my passion for natural skincare and my desire to create something meaningful. Despite the long hours and financial uncertainty, I'd persevered, slowly building a loyal customer base at local markets and a few boutique shops. Now, with this inheritance, I could take my business to the next level. I spent evenings researching equipment that could increase my production capacity, sketching designs for elegant packaging that would make my products stand out on store shelves. I dreamed of opening my own brick-and-mortar shop, a welcoming space where customers could experience the scents and textures of my products firsthand. I reached out to my friend Sarah, a graphic designer I'd met at a local business networking event. Over coffee at our favorite neighborhood cafe, I shared my plans for expanding the business. Her eyes lit up as I described my vision, and soon we were hunched over her laptop, brainstorming logo designs and color schemes that would capture the essence of my brand. As we worked, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This was more than just a business opportunity. It was a chance to create something lasting, to pour my passion and creativity into a venture that could touch people's lives in a meaningful way. But even as I reveled in the possibilities before me, I couldn't shake a nagging sense of responsibility. $800,000 was a life-changing sum, and I was determined to use it wisely. I made an appointment with a financial advisor, wanting to ensure that I managed this windfall in a way that would secure my future and honor my parents' hard work. In the advisor's office, Surrounded by charts and graphs, I laid out my plans and dreams. She listened attentively, offering guidance on how to balance my immediate needs with long-term financial security. We discussed investments, retirement planning, and setting aside funds for emergencies. It was a sobering conversation, but one that left me feeling more confident and prepared for the journey ahead. As the days passed, I found myself experiencing a roller coaster of emotions. Excitement would give way to anxiety, joy to a sudden, overwhelming sense of loss as I wished my parents were here to share in this new chapter of my life. There were moments when the weight of the decision-making felt almost paralyzing. What if I made the wrong choices? What if I squandered this incredible opportunity? In those moments of doubt, I'd take a walk through my neighborhood, breathing in the crisp autumn air and reminding myself of how far I'd come. I thought of all the obstacles I'd overcome, the late nights and early mornings, the sacrifices and setbacks. This inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a testament to my parents' belief in me, in my ability to create a beautiful life for myself. As the leaves continued to fall and the days grew shorter, I felt a sense of transformation taking hold. The girl who had always lived paycheck to paycheck, who had learned to make do with less and find joy in simple pleasures, was still there. But alongside her was emerging a woman with the means to turn her dreams into reality, to create a life filled with purpose and possibility. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges to face, decisions to make, and moments of uncertainty. But as I stood at the threshold of this new chapter in my life, I felt a sense of hope and determination that I hadn't experienced in years. With each passing day, my plans became more concrete, my vision for the future clearer. I scheduled viewings for potential homes, met with contractors to discuss renovations, and began the process of securing permits for my expanded business operations. Each step forward felt like a victory, a tangible manifestation of the dreams I'd held close for so long. As autumn gave way to winter, I found myself looking forward to the new year with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in a long time. The inheritance from my parents had given me more than just financial security. It had reignited my passion, my creativity, and my belief in the possibility of a brighter future. Standing by my window one evening, watching the first snowflakes of the season dance in the glow of the streetlights, I made a silent promise to myself and to the memory of my parents. I would use this gift to build a life that would make them proud, to create something beautiful and meaningful that would honor their legacy of hard work and perseverance. With that promise in my heart, I turned away from the window, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the future might hold. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt truly prepared to embrace it with open arms and an open heart. As the Portland winter slowly gave way to spring, I felt a renewed sense of energy and purpose. The cherry blossoms along the waterfront were just beginning to bloom, their delicate pink petals a promise of new beginnings. I had spent the past few months carefully planning and dreaming, my inheritance a constant source of hope and possibility. But as the saying goes, no good news goes unpunished, and I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. It was a typical rainy Saturday afternoon when my phone rang. I was in the middle of sorting through paint swatches for my soon-to-be new home, debating between sea mist and coastal fog for the living room. The name on the screen made my heart sink. Linda, my mother-in-law. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "Hello, Linda," I answered, trying to keep my voice light and friendly. But from the moment she started speaking, I knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant chat about the weather or her latest bridge club drama. "I hear you've come into some money," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "No, how are you? Or, hope you're doing well." Just straight to the point, as always. I felt my stomach clench. How did she know? My husband, Tom, and I had agreed to keep the inheritance quiet for now, not wanting to deal with the inevitable questions and unsolicited advice from family and friends. But somehow, the news had leaked. Yes, that's right, I stammered, caught off guard by her directness. "My parents left me an inheritance. We're still figuring out the details." Linda scoffed, a sound I had become all too familiar with over the years. "Details? What's there to figure out?" You've got money now, more than you know what to do with, I'm sure. I bit back a retort, reminding myself to stay calm. Linda had never approved of me, always believing that Tom had married beneath him. In her eyes, I was just a small-town girl who had somehow tricked her precious son into marriage. The fact that Tom and I had been happily married for 5 years, building a life together based on love and mutual respect, seemed to matter little to her. Actually, Linda, we have some very specific plans for the money, I began, but she cut me off before I could elaborate. Plans? Let me guess, you're going to waste it all on that little soap business of yours? Or maybe buy some ridiculously overpriced house you can't afford to maintain. Her words stung, each one a sharp jab at the dreams I had been carefully nurturing. I thought of the business plan I had spent weeks refining, the hours of research I had put into finding the perfect home. In just a few sentences, Linda had reduced all of that to frivolous indulgence. That's not fair, I said, my voice trembling slightly. This money is a gift from my parents. They worked hard their whole lives to save it, and I intend to use it responsibly. Linda's laugh was harsh and humorless. Responsibly? Please. You wouldn't know responsibility if it hit you in the face. You know what would be responsible? Sharing that money with family who could really use it. And there it was, the real reason for her call. I should have seen it coming, but somehow I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, Linda's interest was born out of genuine concern rather than self-interest. Linda, I understand you might be going through some financial difficulties, but difficulties, she interrupted again, her voice rising. Is that what Tom told you? Well, let me tell you something, Missy. Your husband has always understood the importance of family. He knows where his loyalties should lie. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was implying. Tom and I had always been open with each other about our finances. We had separate accounts, sure, but we made all major decisions together. Surely, he wouldn't have promised his mother money without discussing it with me first? I think there's been some misunderstanding, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom and I haven't made any decisions about the inheritance yet. We're still in the planning stages. Planning stages? Linda's voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, let me make it simple for you. You're going to give us a portion of that money. It's the right thing to do, the moral thing. Unless, of course, you're too selfish to care about family. Her accusation hit me like a physical blow. Selfish? Me? I thought of all the times I had bent over backward to please Linda, the holidays spent at her house instead of visiting my own family, the endless critiques of my cooking and housekeeping that I had endured with a smile. And now, because I wasn't immediately offering to hand over my inheritance, I was selfish? Linda, I'm sorry, but I can't make that kind of decision right now, I said, my resolve strengthening. This is something Tom and I need to discuss privately. Privately, she scoffed. There's nothing private about family matters. You listen to me, young lady. If you don't do the right thing here, you'll regret it. I raised Tom to understand the importance of family loyalty. Don't you dare come between him and his obligations. The threat in her words was unmistakable. As she continued to rant, I felt a cold fear settling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Linda was implying that she could turn Tom against me, that my marriage itself was at stake. As I listened to her tirade, my mind wandered to the early days of my relationship with Tom. We had met at a local farmer's market where I was selling my handmade soaps. He had been charming and genuine, asking thoughtful questions about my products and process. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of hikes in Forest Park, cozy evenings at Powell's Books, and lazy Sunday brunches at our favorite cafe in the Alberta Arts District. From the beginning, Linda had made her disapproval clear. She had hoped Tom would marry the daughter of one of her country club friends, someone she deemed more suitable. But Tom had stood by me, defending our relationship and our choices. Now, listening to Linda's angry words, I couldn't help but wonder if that solidarity was as strong as I had believed. I understand you're upset, Linda, I said when she finally paused for breath. But this is a decision Tom and I need to make together. I'm not comfortable discussing it further right now. You ungrateful little Linda's voice rose to a shriek, and I quickly ended the call, my hands shaking. For a long moment, I sat in stunned silence, the paint swatches forgotten on the table before me. The warm, hopeful feeling I had been nurturing since receiving the inheritance had been replaced by a cold knot of anxiety. Linda's words echoed in my head, each one chipping away at the confidence I had been building. Was I being selfish? The rational part of my mind knew that wasn't true. This was my inheritance, a gift from my parents meant to secure my future. But years of Linda's criticism had left their mark, and I couldn't completely shake the doubt she had planted. More than that, I was worried about Tom. How would he react when I told him about this conversation? Would he stand by me, or would Linda's manipulation drive a wedge between us? As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard Tom's key in the lock. He called out a cheerful greeting as he entered, the sound of grocery bags rustling accompanying his footsteps. "Hey, honey. I picked up some of that artisanal bread you like from Grand Central Bakery. I thought we could have a nice dinner tonight, maybe open a bottle of What's Wrong." I looked up to see Tom's concerned face, his brow furrowed as he took in my distressed expression. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to throw myself into his arms and let him assure me that everything would be okay. But I knew we needed to have a serious conversation. "Your mother called," I said quietly. Tom's expression immediately shifted from concern to wariness. He knew as well as I did that calls from his mother rarely brought good news. "What did she want?" he asked, setting the grocery bags on the counter and coming to sit beside me. I took a deep breath and recounted the conversation, watching Tom's face carefully as I spoke. His expression darkened as I described Linda's demands and veiled threats. "I can't believe she would do this," Tom said when I finished, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm so sorry, babe. You know how she can be." "Tom," I said hesitantly, Did you tell her about the inheritance? Or promise her any money?" His eyes widened in surprise. "What? No, of course not. We agreed to keep it between us for now. I would never go behind your back like that." Relief washed over me at his words, but it was quickly followed by a new wave of concern. If Tom hadn't told Linda about the inheritance or made any promises, where had she gotten her information? And what did this mean for our relationship with her going forward? "We need to set some boundaries," I said, reaching out to take Tom's hand. "I know she's your mother, but this isn't okay. She can't just demand money from us or try to manipulate our decisions." Tom nodded, squeezing my hand. "You're right. I'll talk to her, make it clear that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable." As we sat there, hands clasped, I felt some of the tension begin to ease. Tom's support meant everything to me, especially in moments like this. But I knew this wasn't the end of the issue. Linda's words had opened up a Pandora's box of questions and concerns that we would need to address. That evening, as we sat on our small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tom and I had a long, honest conversation about our future. We talked about our dreams for the inheritance money, our concerns about family expectations, and our commitment to making decisions as a team. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to twinkle, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Linda's criticism had cast a shadow over my dreams, but it hadn't extinguished them. If anything, it had strengthened my resolve to use this gift wisely and build a life that reflected our values and aspirations. The road ahead might be challenging, with family drama and difficult decisions to navigate. But as I leaned against Tom, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves, I knew we would face it together. The unwelcome shadow of criticism couldn't darken the brightness of the future we were building, one careful step at a time. The weeks following Linda's phone call were tense, to say the least. Tom and I tried to go about our daily lives as normally as possible, but there was an undercurrent of anxiety that seemed to follow us everywhere. We'd made progress on our plans. We'd put an offer on a charming craftsman-style house in the Laurel Hill neighborhood, and I'd started looking into renting a small commercial kitchen space for my soap business. But every step forward felt overshadowed by the looming presence of Linda's disapproval. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything came to a head. I remember it clearly because I'd spent the morning at a local lavender farm, sourcing ingredients for a new line of soaps I was developing. The scent of lavender still clung to my clothes as I pulled into the driveway of our rental house, my mind already racing with ideas for new product formulations. As I approached the front door, juggling my purse and a box of freshly cut lavender, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of the interior visible through the gap. My heart rate quickened. Had I forgotten to lock up when I left this morning? No, I was sure I hadn't. Tom was at work, and we always double-checked the locks after the string of break-ins in the neighborhood last year. Cautiously, I pushed the door open, the familiar creak of the hinges suddenly sounding ominous in the quiet afternoon. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" The silence that greeted me was broken. Only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my parents that suddenly seemed to be counting down to something foreboding. I took a few steps inside, my eyes darting around the entryway, looking for signs of disturbance. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound coming from the direction of our bedroom. My first instinct was to run, to get out of the house and call the police. But curiosity and a strange sense of determination kept me rooted to the spot. Slowly, I set down my box of lavender and my purse, picking up the heavy ceramic umbrella stand by the door. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made me feel a little less vulnerable as I crept down the hallway. As I approached the bedroom, the sounds became clearer. It wasn't the rough ransacking of a burglar I was hearing, but the methodical opening and closing of drawers, accompanied by muttered words I couldn't quite make out. My confusion only grew as I pushed open the bedroom door, the umbrella stand raised defensively. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me. There, in the middle of our bedroom, surrounded by open drawers and scattered clothes, stood Linda, my mother-in-law. The woman who had been haunting my thoughts for weeks was now physically invading my home. For a moment, we both froze, staring at each other in shock. Linda's hands were full of papers, documents from our personal files, I realized with a jolt. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her usually perfectly coiffed hair slightly disheveled, her eyes wide with surprise. "Linda?" I gasped, lowering the umbrella stand. What are you doing here?" Her surprise quickly morphed into defiance. She straightened up, clutching the papers to her chest. "I had to see for myself," she said, her voice cold and accusatory. "I had to know what you were hiding." "Hiding?" I repeated, my shock giving way to anger. "We're not hiding anything. This is our home, our private space. You have no right to be here." Linda scoffed, gesturing around the room with one manicured hand. "Private? There's no such thing as private when it comes to family. I raised Tom. I have a right to know what's going on in his life." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fury rising within me. "Linda, I don't know how you got in here, but you need to leave. Now, before I call the police." Her eyes narrowed at the threat. "You wouldn't dare. What would Tom say if he knew you called the cops on his own mother?" The mention of Tom snapped something inside me. "What would Tom say?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What would Tom say about his mother breaking into our home and going through our personal belongings?" I strode across the room, snatching the papers from her hands. As I did, I caught glimpses of bank statements, legal documents related to my inheritance, even some of Tom's and my private correspondence. The violation of privacy made me feel physically ill. "This is unacceptable, Linda," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "You've crossed a line. A big one." Linda's face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare talk to me about lines. You're the one who's crossed a line, coming between me and my son, poisoning him against his family with your greed and selfishness." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, colliding with the dresser behind me. A framed photo of Tom and me on our wedding day toppled over, the sound of breaking glass punctuating the tense silence that followed Linda's outburst. As I bent to pick up the fallen frame, careful of the shards of glass, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This photo had always been a symbol of the life Tom and I were building together, a reminder of the love and trust we shared. Now, like our sense of security and privacy, it lay shattered on the floor. "Linda," I said quietly, setting the broken frame aside, "I think you should go. We can talk about this later, with Tom present, but right now, you need to leave our home." For a moment, I thought she might argue further. Her face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched at her sides. But then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders sagged. Without another word, she turned and swept out of the room. I followed her to the front door, watching as she got into her car and drove away. Only when her taillights had disappeared around the corner did I allow myself to close the door, leaning against it as the full weight of what had just happened crashed over me. My sanctuary, my safe space, had been violated. The home that Tom and I had made together, filled with our shared memories and dreams for the future, suddenly felt tainted. I looked around the living room, seeing it through new eyes. Had Linda gone through everything? Had she read our private letters, pored over our financial documents, judged every aspect of our lives? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called Tom. As it rang, I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. When he answered, his voice cheerful and oblivious, I found myself at a loss for words. "Honey, are you there?" Tom's concern was evident even through the phone. "Tom," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You need to come home. Now. Your mother. She was here." "What? Mom was there? Why didn't she tell me she was visiting?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. "She wasn't visiting, Tom. She broke in. She was going through our things, our private documents. She invaded our home." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm on my way. Don't touch anything. I'll be there as soon as I can." As I waited for Tom to arrive, I wandered through the house, taking stock of the damage. It wasn't physical damage. Linda hadn't broken anything except the picture frame, but the emotional toll was immeasurable. In the kitchen, cabinet doors stood open, their contents clearly rifled through. In the office, the drawers of our filing cabinet gaped open, folders and papers strewn across the desk. But it was the bedroom that hurt the most. This was our most private space, the heart of our home. Seeing it in disarray, knowing that Linda had invaded the sanctuary, made me feel violated in a way I'd never experienced before. I sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. The scent of lavender still clung to my clothes, a cruel reminder of the peaceful morning I'd had before walking into this nightmare. How had things escalated to this point? How could Linda, a woman who claimed to love her son, do something so hurtful and invasive? The sound of the front door opening jolted me from my thoughts. In here, I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the quiet house. Tom appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of concern and barely contained anger. He took in the scene, the open drawers, the scattered papers, the broken picture frame, and I saw his jaw clench. "Oh, honey," he said softly, crossing the room to sit beside me on the bed. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then Tom spoke, his voice low and determined. "This ends now. I'm going to call Mom, and I'm going to make it clear that this behavior is absolutely unacceptable. She's crossed a line, and there have to be consequences." I nodded, relief washing over me at his words. This was the support I needed, the united front I'd hoped for. "What do we do now?" I asked, gesturing at the chaos around us. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We clean up. We change the locks. And we decide how we want to move forward together." As we began the process of putting our home back in order, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. Anger at Linda for her invasion of our privacy. Sadness at the rift this would undoubtedly cause in Tom's family. Fear about what this meant for our future. But underneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. Tom and I were facing this together, united in our determination to protect the life we were building. That night, as we lay in bed, our home secured with new locks and an upgraded alarm system, Tom turned to me in the darkness. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought she'd go this far. I should have seen it coming, should have protected you better." I reached out, finding his hand in the dark and squeezing it tightly. "We're in this together," I reminded him. "We'll get through this, just like we've gotten through everything else." As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Linda's invasion of our home had shaken us, but it had also strengthened our resolve. Whatever came next, we would face it as a team, our bond stronger than any outside force trying to tear us apart. The sanctuary of our home had been violated, but the sanctuary of our relationship remained intact. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. The days following Linda's invasion of our home were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Tom and I walked on eggshells, jumping at every unexpected sound, constantly checking and rechecking the locks. We changed our routines, varied our schedules, anything to regain a sense of security that had been so violently torn away from us. It was a crisp Saturday morning when everything came to a head. The farmers' market was in full swing down at Portland State University, and I had promised myself a morning of normalcy, of browsing fresh produce and artisanal goods, of trying to reclaim some semblance of the life we had before. Tom had an early meeting with a client, so I went alone, breathing in the scent of fresh-baked bread and blooming flowers, trying to quiet the constant hum of anxiety that had become my constant companion. I was examining a bunch of organic kale when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from our neighbor, Mrs. Chin. "Someone's at your house. Looks like Tom's mom. She seems upset." My heart leapt into my throat. Linda, at our house. Again. I abandoned my half-filled shopping basket and ran to my car, my mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and honking horns as I weaved through the Saturday morning traffic, praying I wouldn't be too late to prevent whatever new disaster Linda had in store. As I screeched to a halt in front of our house, I saw Linda's car parked haphazardly in our driveway, one wheel up on the lawn. The front door was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. My new keys trembled in my hand as I approached, hearing muffled sounds coming from inside. "Linda?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Linda, what are you doing here?" The sounds grew louder as I entered the house. They were coming from the study, where Tom and I kept our important documents, including, I realized with a jolt of horror, the paperwork related to my inheritance. I burst into the study and froze, unable to comprehend the scene before me. Linda stood by the fireplace, a maniacal glint in her eye. In her hands was a stack of papers, bank statements, legal documents, and, to my utter disbelief, a significant portion of the cash from my inheritance that we'd been keeping in our safe until we could decide how best to invest it. "Linda," I said slowly, raising my hands as if approaching a wild animal, "what are you doing?" She turned to me, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and what looked disturbingly like triumph. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she spat. "I'm putting an end to this farce." Before I could react, she turned to the fireplace. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the stack of cash into the flames. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. The fire greedily consumed the money, the edges of the bills curling and blackening in the heat. Linda laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "There," she said, her voice dripping with a perverse satisfaction. "Now you can't use it to tear this family apart." I stared at the flames, watching as thousands of dollars literally went up in smoke. The room filled with the acrid scent of burning paper and ink. It was surreal, like a scene from a bizarre nightmare. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all, while another part wanted to cry at the senseless destruction. "Linda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you have any idea what you've done?" She turned to me, her eyes blazing with the same intensity as the fire she'd just fed. "I've done what's necessary. This money was tearing our family apart. It was changing Tom, making him forget his roots, his obligations." I shook my head, disbelief warring with anger. This money was a gift from my parents. It was meant to secure our future, to help us build a life together. How could you possibly think this was the right thing to do? Linda scoffed, gesturing wildly around the room. "A life together? You mean a life where you slowly poison my son against his family? Where you use this windfall to create a wedge between him and his roots?" As she ranted, a strange calm settled over me. I looked at this woman, this person who should have been family, who should have supported and loved us. Instead, She stood there, reeking of smoke and self-righteousness, having just destroyed a significant portion of our financial security in a misguided attempt at control. And suddenly, incongruously, I felt a bubble of laughter rise in my throat. Linda's tirade stuttered to a halt as I began to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh or even an amused one. It was the laughter of someone who has seen the absurdity of their situation laid bare, who has reached the limits of what they can process rationally. "What's so funny?" Linda demanded, her face flushing an even deeper shade of red. I gestured at the fireplace, where the last of the bills were curling into ash. "Do you want to know what's funny, Linda? What's absolutely hilarious about this whole situation?" She stared at me, confusion replacing some of the anger in her eyes. "The money you just burned? That exact amount? Tom and I had set it aside for you." The color drained from Linda's face. "What?" I nodded, a mirthless smile on my face. "That's right. We knew you were struggling financially. Tom wanted to help you, to make sure you were taken care of. We were going to surprise you with it next week at your birthday dinner." Linda stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "You're lying." I shook my head. "I wish I was, Linda. I really do. But that's the truth. The money you just destroyed in some misguided attempt at justice, that was meant for you. To help you. Because despite everything, despite all the criticism and judgment and now this," I gestured around the room, "we still cared about your well-being." The fight seemed to go out of Linda all at once. She sank into the armchair by the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the dying embers where the money had been. I didn't know," she mumbled. "No," I agreed, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You were so convinced that I was some kind of gold digger, so sure that I was using this inheritance to come between you and Tom, that you never once considered the possibility that we might actually want to help you." Linda looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked her age, tired, vulnerable, afraid. "What have I done?" she whispered. I sighed, the adrenaline of the moment fading, leaving me feeling drained and oddly hollow. "You've made a terrible mistake, Linda. One that can't be undone." Just then, we heard the front door open. "Hello?" Tom's voice called out. "Is anyone home?" "I saw both your cars outside." He appeared in the doorway of the study, taking in the scene before him, his mother crumpled in the armchair, me standing by the fireplace with its lingering smell of burnt money, the scattered papers around the room. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight with concern and confusion. I met his eyes, seeing the worry and love there. Despite everything that had happened, despite the shock and anger and bitter disappointment of the last few weeks, I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who stood by me, who chose our life together over the manipulations of his mother. "Tom," I said gently, "I think you need to sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Over the next hour, we explained everything to Tom, Linda's break-in, her accusations, and finally, the destruction of the money. Tom listened in stunned silence, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and finally, a deep, profound sadness. When we finished, he turned to his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I don't even know where to begin. How could you do this? How could you violate our trust, our home, like this?" Linda couldn't meet his eyes. I thought I was protecting you," she mumbled. Tom shook his head. "Protecting me? From what? From building a life with the woman I love? From using an unexpected gift to secure our future? Or were you trying to protect me from having a relationship with my wife that's stronger than my relationship with you?" His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Linda flinched as if she'd been struck. "I think," Tom continued, his voice softer now, "that you need to leave, Mom. We all need some time to process this. And you need to think long and hard about your actions and their consequences." Linda nodded mutely, rising from the chair on shaky legs. As she passed me on her way out, she paused. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Then she was gone, the front door closing behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the house. Tom and I stood there, surrounded by the aftermath of Linda's destructive visit. The acrid smell of burnt money still hung in the air, a tangible reminder of the chaos that had erupted in our lives. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice small in the heavy silence. Tom came to me, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me close. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We rebuild," he said simply. "We clean up this mess, we figure out our finances, and we move forward. Together." I nodded against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Together," I echoed. As we began the process of cleaning up the study, sorting through the scattered papers and assessing the damage, I found myself reflecting on the strange, twisted path that had led us here. The inheritance that was meant to be a blessing had become a source of so much strife. Yet, as I watched Tom carefully gathering the remnants of our financial documents, I realized something important. The money, as substantial as it was, wasn't the real gift my parents had left me. The real gift was the strength I'd found within myself, the resilience to face these challenges head-on. And more than that, it was the partnership I shared with Tom, a bond that had been tested by fire, quite literally, and emerged stronger. Yes, we had lost a significant amount of money today, but we had gained something far more valuable, a clearer understanding of our priorities, of the life we wanted to build together, and of the boundaries we needed to set to protect that life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Tom and I stood back and surveyed our work. The study was tidy once more, the visible signs of Linda's destructive visit erased. But we both knew that the real work, the emotional work, the rebuilding of trust, the reshaping of family dynamics, was only just beginning. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, noticing my pensive expression. I turned to him, a small smile playing on my lips despite the heaviness in my heart. "I'm thinking that we've been through one hell of a day. And I'm thinking that despite everything, I'm grateful." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of his usual humor returning. "Grateful? For having a significant portion of our savings go up in flames?" I shook my head. "No, grateful for you. For us. For the fact that we're standing here, together, ready to face whatever comes next." Tom's face softened, and he pulled me into a tight embrace. "Always," he murmured into my hair. "No matter what, it's you and me against the world." As we stood there, holding each other in the fading light of day, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Yes, we had faced a storm today, one that had left destruction in its wake. But we had weathered it together. And together, we would rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. The flames of Linda's perverse justice had consumed more than just money. They had burned away the last vestiges of doubt and insecurity in our relationship. From those ashes, something new and stronger could grow. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was far from clear. But as I stood there in Tom's arms, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as we had faced this one, side by side, hand in hand, our love and commitment to each other unshakable. The day's events had shown us the worst of human nature, jealousy, mistrust, and destructive impulses. But they had also shown us the best, resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. As we finally left the study, closing the door on the chaos of the day, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Whatever it held, I knew we would face it together, stronger for having weathered this storm. The days following Linda's destructive act passed in a haze of disbelief and exhaustion. Tom and I moved through our daily routines like sleepwalkers, going through the motions of normalcy while our minds struggled to process the surreal events that had unfolded in our study. The acrid smell of burnt money lingered in the air, a constant reminder of what we'd lost. We'd tried everything to get rid of it: air fresheners, scented candles, even burning sage in a desperate attempt to cleanse the space. But the scent clung stubbornly to the curtains, the upholstery, even our clothes. It was as if the universe itself was refusing to let us forget, forcing us to confront the reality of our situation with every breath. A week after the incident, Tom and I found ourselves sitting at our kitchen table, a spread of financial documents between us. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow that felt at odds with the heaviness in our hearts. "Okay," Tom said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Let's assess the damage." I nodded, picking up a statement from our bank. The good news is, most of the inheritance was already in our accounts or invested. What she burned was the cash we had set aside for immediate use and emergencies. Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his stress. "And for Mom," he added quietly. The weight of those words hung between us. The irony of Linda destroying the very money we'd intended to give her was almost too much to bear. I reached across the table, taking Tom's hand in mine. "We'll figure this out," I said, trying to infuse my voice with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We still have each other, and we still have a future to build." Tom squeezed my hand, offering a weak smile. "You're right. It's just. I keep replaying it in my mind, you know? Trying to understand how we got here, how things went so wrong with Mom." I nodded, understanding all too well. The scene in the study had been replaying on a loop in my own mind, each iteration bringing with it a fresh wave of shock and disbelief. "Have you heard from her?" I asked gently. Tom shook his head. "Not since that day. I think she's finally realized the magnitude of what she's done." We lapsed into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The quiet was broken by the chirping of birds outside, a reminder that the world was continuing to turn despite the chaos in our lives. "We need to make some decisions," I said finally, gesturing to the paper spread before us. "About the house, the business, everything." Tom nodded, his face setting into lines of determination. "You're right. No more dwelling on what we've lost. It's time to focus on what we still have and what we can build from here." Over the next few hours, we pored over our finances, making lists and adjusting plans. The dream house we'd been eyeing in Laurelhurst was now out of reach, at least for the time being. My plans for expanding the soap business would need to be scaled back, relying more on sweat equity than financial investment. As we worked, I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. There was anger, of course, at Linda for her destructive act, at the unfairness of having our dreams derailed. But there was also a growing sense of resilience, a determination to not let this setback define us. "You know," I said, looking up from a spreadsheet, in a weird way I almost feel. "I don't know, liberated." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Liberated? After losing a chunk of our savings?" I shrugged, struggling to put the feeling into words. It's like, all this time, we've been so focused on what we could do with the inheritance, how it could change our lives. And now that some of it's gone, it's like we're free to just live. To build our life on our own terms, without the weight of all that potential hanging over us. Tom was quiet for a moment, considering my words. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I think I get it. It's like we're back to basics, in a way. Just you and me, figuring things out together." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of affection for this man who always seemed to understand, even when I couldn't fully articulate my thoughts. As the day wore on, our plans began to take shape. We'd stay in our current rental for now, putting off the house purchase until we could rebuild our savings. I'd focus on growing my soap business through online sales and local markets, while Tom would take on some extra consulting work to boost our income. It wasn't the future we'd envisioned just a few weeks ago, but as we talked and planned, I felt a growing sense of excitement. There was something empowering about facing this challenge head-on, about knowing that whatever we built from here would be entirely of our own making. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our kitchen, Tom leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "I think that's enough for one day," he said, rubbing his eyes. "How about we order some pizza and watch a movie? Something mindless and fun." I smiled, feeling the tension of the day begin to ease. "That sounds perfect." Later that evening, as we curled up on the couch with our pizza, I found myself studying Tom's profile in the flickering light of the TV. Despite the stress of the past week, despite the anger and disappointment, I was struck by how steady he remained. How, even in the face of his mother's betrayal, he had chosen us, our relationship, our future, without hesitation. "Hey," I said softly, nudging him with my foot. "I love you, you know that?" He turned to me, his eyes soft in the dim light. "I love you too," he said, pulling me closer. "More than ever." As we settled back to watch the movie, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, we had lost something significant. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. But we had each other, and we had a strength that Linda's actions had revealed rather than diminished. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already buzzing with plans. As I made coffee, I found myself drawn to the study. Standing in the doorway, I looked at the space that had been the site of so much drama. In the soft morning light, it looked ordinary. Just a room with a desk, some bookshelves, a comfortable armchair by the window. Impulsively, I walked to the center of the room and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The scent of burnt money was still there, but fainter now, overlaid with the familiar smells of home, old books, the lavender sachets I kept in the drawers, the faint aroma of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Opening my eyes, I made a decision. This room, this space that had been tainted by Linda's actions, needed to be reclaimed. Transformed into something new, something that represented the future we were determined to build. By the time Tom wandered into the kitchen, sleep-rumpled and yawning, I was a whirlwind of energy. "I want to renovate the study," I announced as I handed him a cup of coffee. He blinked at me, still not fully awake. "Renovate? We're renting, remember?" I waved off his concern. Nothing major. Just a fresh coat of paint, maybe some new curtains. Rearrange the furniture. I want to turn it into a proper workspace for both of us. Somewhere we can plan and dream and build our future. Tom was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee as he considered my words. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You know what? I like it. It's symbolic in a way. Taking that space and making it ours again." Over the next week, we threw ourselves into the project. We painted the walls a soft, soothing green, hung new curtains in a cheerful floral print, and rearranged the furniture to create 2 workspaces, one for my soap business, one for Tom's consulting work. As we worked, we talked. About our fears and our hopes, about the challenges we faced and the opportunities we saw. We discussed Linda, too, the hurt she had caused, the trust that had been broken. It wasn't easy, but with each conversation, each shared moment of vulnerability, I felt us growing stronger, both as individuals and as a couple. The day we finished the renovation, we stood in the doorway of the study, arms around each other, admiring our handiwork. The room was transformed, light, airy, full of potential. "It's perfect," I said, leaning my head on Tom's shoulder. He kissed the top of my head. "It really is. You know, I've been thinking, maybe we should invite Mom over. To see the new space, to talk things through." I stiffened slightly, surprised by the suggestion. "Are you sure? After everything that's happened?" Tom sighed. "I'm not saying it'll be easy. And I'm not saying we forgive and forget. But she's still my mom, you know? And if we're really going to move forward, build the life we want, I think we need to at least try to heal this rift." I was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. The thought of facing Linda again, of having her in our home after what she'd done, was daunting. But I also understood Tom's perspective. Family was complicated, messy, but it was also important. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's invite her. But we set clear boundaries, okay? This is about moving forward, not rehashing the past." Tom nodded, relief evident in his face. "Agreed. We'll do it together, like everything else." As we stood there, looking at the room we had reclaimed and renewed, I felt a surge of hope. The ashes of what we had lost were still there, a part of our story that couldn't be erased. But from those ashes, we were building something new, a stronger relationship, a clearer vision of our future, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. The aftermath of Linda's actions had been painful, challenging us in ways we never expected. But it had also revealed a resilience in us, both individually and as a couple, that I don't think either of us fully realized we possessed. As we closed the door on the newly renovated study and headed to the kitchen to start dinner, I felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. Yes, there would be challenges. Yes, the conversation with Linda would be difficult. But we were facing it all together, stronger and more united than ever before. The ashes of our past were just that, the past. Our future, bright and full of possibility, was ours to shape. And standing there in our kitchen, chopping vegetables side by side with Tom, I knew that whatever that future held, we were ready to face it. Together. As the seasons changed in Portland, from the crisp autumn to the rainy winter, and then to the hopeful spring, I found myself on a journey of personal transformation that mirrored the shifting landscape around me. The events of the past months, the inheritance, Linda's destructive act, the aftermath, had reshaped my world in ways I never could have anticipated. And yet, as I stood at the threshold of a new chapter in our lives, I found myself oddly grateful for the tumultuous path that had led us here. It was a sunny Saturday morning when Tom and I decided to take a walk in Forest Park. The air was fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, creating a dappled pattern on the trail before us. As we hiked, hand in hand, I found myself reflecting on the strange twists and turns our life had taken. "You know," I said, pausing to catch my breath at a scenic overlook, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be thankful for having a significant portion of my inheritance burned up, I'd have thought they were crazy." Tom raised an eyebrow, a mix of amusement and curiosity on his face. "And yet here you are, sounding almost grateful. Care to elaborate?" I laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. It wasn't a bitter laugh or even a sarcastic one. It was genuine, full of a joy that surprised even me. "It's just, look at us, Tom. Look at where we are, what we've been through. It's like some cosmic joke, isn't it? We get this amazing gift, this chance to change our lives, and then it quite literally goes up in flames. And yet," I gestured around us at the beautiful forest, at our intertwined hands, at the simple gold bands on our fingers that seemed to shine even brighter in the dappled sunlight. "And yet here we are. Stronger than ever, more sure of ourselves and each other than we've ever been. It's like the universe decided to test us to see if we were worthy of the gift we'd been given. And maybe we failed that test, but in failing, we found something even more valuable." Tom was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant as he processed my words. Then he smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "You're right," he said softly. "It's ironic, isn't it? We lost money, but we gained. Us. The real us, stripped of all the what-ifs and maybes that the inheritance brought with it." We continued our hike, the conversation flowing as easily as the trail beneath our feet. We talked about the past months, about the challenges we'd faced and overcome, about Linda and the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship with her. The meeting with Linda, when it finally happened, had been tense and emotional. We'd sat in our newly renovated study, the space that had once been the site of so much destruction, now a symbol of our resilience and hope. Linda had been subdued, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a hesitant, almost fragile air. "I'm so sorry," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to make this right." And the truth was, there was no easy way to make it right. The money she had burned couldn't be replaced, and the trust that had been broken couldn't be instantly repaired. But as we talked, really talked, perhaps for the first time since Tom and I had gotten married, I began to see Linda in a new light. She spoke of her fears, of losing her son, of becoming irrelevant in our lives, of facing her own mortality and the legacy she would leave behind. Her actions, as destructive and misguided as they were, had come from a place of deep-seated insecurity and love, albeit a possessive, unhealthy kind of love. As we hiked through Forest Park, Tom and I reflected on that conversation, on the long road of healing that lay ahead for all of us. "You know," Tom said, helping me over a fallen log, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost glad all of this happened. Not the destruction itself, of course, but it forced us to confront things. With Mom, with ourselves, with our plans for the future. It's like we got a crash course in what really matters." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The loss of the money had forced us to reevaluate everything, our priorities, our dreams, our relationships. And in that reevaluation, we had discovered strengths we never knew we had. My soap business, which I had once dreamed of expanding with the help of the inheritance, had grown in ways I never anticipated. Without the safety net of the extra money, I had been forced to get creative, to network more, to really hustle. And to my surprise, I found I loved it. The challenge energized me, and the business was thriving not in spite of our setbacks, but because of the resilience and creativity they had inspired in me. Tom, too, had found new purpose in his work. The extra consulting he had taken on to help rebuild our savings had led to new opportunities, connections that were now opening doors we had never even known existed. As we reached the summit of our hike, we paused to take in the view. The city of Portland spread out before us, a patchwork of green parks and urban landscapes, the Willamette River winding its way through the heart of it all. It was beautiful, full of possibility, just like the future we were building together. "You know what's really ironic?" I said, leaning into Tom's side as we gazed out at the city. "What's that?" If none of this had happened, if we had just gotten the inheritance and everything had gone smoothly, we might never have discovered how strong we really are. How capable we are of facing adversity and coming out stronger on the other side. Tom nodded, his arm tightening around me. "It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Except in our case, it's more like, what doesn't burn you makes you stronger." I laughed at his joke, the sound carried away by the breeze. But there was truth in his words, a deep, resonant truth that echoed in my heart. We had been tested by fire, quite literally. The flames that had consumed a portion of our inheritance could have just as easily consumed our dreams, our relationship, our hope for the future. But instead, like phoenixes rising from the ashes, we had emerged stronger, more resilient, more sure of ourselves and each other than ever before. As we made our way back down the trail, I found myself thinking about the concept of irony. How life so often gives us exactly what we need, but rarely in the package we expect. We had received an inheritance, a gift meant to secure our future. And in a roundabout, painful way, that's exactly what it had done, just not in the way we had initially envisioned. The sun was setting as we reached the trailhead, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. We paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the moment. "So," Tom said, a hint of playfulness in his voice, "what's next for us? Now that we've embraced the irony of fate and all that." I pretended to think hard, tapping my chin dramatically. "Well, I was thinking, maybe we should take up fire dancing? You know, really lean into this whole phoenix rising from the ashes theme we've got going on." Tom laughed, pulling me in for a kiss. "I love you, you know that? Even when you're being utterly ridiculous." "Especially when I'm being utterly ridiculous," I corrected him with a grin. As we walked back to our car, hand in hand, I felt a deep sense of contentment wash over me. Yes, our journey had been unexpected, often painful, and filled with more ironic twists than I could have ever imagined. But it had also been beautiful, transformative, and ultimately, deeply rewarding. We had lost money, but gained immeasurable wealth in other ways, in the strength of our relationship, in our newfound resilience, in the clarity of purpose that comes from having your priorities forcibly rearranged. The inheritance that had seemed like such a straightforward blessing had turned out to be anything but. And yet, in the end, it had given us exactly what we needed, not financial security, but something far more valuable. It had given us the opportunity to discover our own strength, to redefine our dreams on our own terms, and to build a future founded not on an unexpected windfall, but on the solid ground of our love, determination, and shared vision. As we drove home through the darkening streets of Portland, I found myself smiling. The future stretched out before us, full of possibility and potential. There would be challenges, of course. Life had certainly taught us that lesson. But I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it together, stronger and wiser for having weathered this storm. The irony of fate had tested us, twisted our expectations, and ultimately reshaped our world. And as I sat there in the car, my hand intertwined with Tom's, I felt nothing but gratitude for the strange, beautiful, ironic journey that had brought us to this moment. Our laughter, once born of disbelief and shock in the face of destruction, had transformed into something joyous and free. It was the laughter of two people who had faced adversity and come out stronger, who had looked into the face of loss and found unexpected gain. As we pulled into our driveway, the porch light welcoming us home, I knew that this was just the beginning. Our story, with all its ironic twists and turns, was far from over. But whatever the future held, I was ready to embrace it. The joy and the sorrow, the triumphs and the setbacks, the expected and the utterly surprising. After all, if life had taught us anything, it was that the most beautiful transformations often come from the most unexpected places. And I, for one, couldn't wait to see what ironic gift fate had in store for us next.